Well, if you find yourself at the Martha Street studio in the Exchange District in downtown Winnipeg these days, you will find a unique blend of textiles and words that help to document our participation in the world around us. That exhibit is called Proofread, and it features everything from these clothes that have been curated over several months, as well as words that become a part of that clothing as it goes along. This is the work designed by Yvonne Mullock, who is an Alberta-based artist who designed this particular exhibit at a printmaking department in Edmonton, as I understand it. We'll get into that in just a second, but first to say welcome, Yvonne Mullock, to Classic 107. So nice to speak to you.
Thanks, Nolan. Thanks so much for your interest in Proofread.
This is such a fascinating concept, especially for us as journalists and writers who are interacting with this work. And I'll get into that in just a second, but maybe you can take us back to the genesis for Proofread and that 9-month residency that I alluded to, and how so inspiration and execution come together.
Sure. So Proofread came about from a visiting lecture position that came about at it was actually more like an artist in residence in the printmaking department at the University of Alberta. And basically, artists are kind of invited to come in and make work alongside the students, and kind of just make work in the space so that the student body can kind of see, what it's like for an artist to make work and kind of come up with ideas and what that process looks like. So for me, that was a really fascinating opportunity to kind of really kind of have access to a whole department of technicians and students and lecturers. And for me, it was kind of like, well, wouldn't it be fascinating if I could somehow make a print project that was really collaborative? Because I'm really fascinated with the processes of making, and it's a recurring theme that's in my work. And in the past, I've kind of collaborated with horses, rug hookers, Stetson hat makers. So for me, it was really fun to kind of use the student body that has this incredible knowledge of printmaking, and kind of access that knowledge to kind of make a work as a group. And really the genesis of the idea is I'm really looking at the traditions of printmaking and kind of poking holes in it. And I'm fascinated with the letterpress in particular, which was invented in the 15th century by Johann Gutenberg. And really that kind of making the letterpress changed humanity and really the dissemination of knowledge, because it made the access of like reading available to the common man, whereas previously kind of books and that kind of thing were very scholarly and kind of handwritten, and only really wealthy people could access books. So kind of like in a similar spirit, in a kind of democratic spirit, I really wanted to kind of use that idea of language and kind of making it accessible to the general public. So you could sort of say that the exhibition it's a print work, it's a video work, it's a performance, and it's an interactive game that audiences, word game that people can play over the course of the exhibition.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about the different elements with which you play in your artistry. None more so Albertan perhaps than the horses and the Stetson hats, as you were describing before, but also as you were participating with this letterpress, and how that it almost reads like fridge letters, like as you're kind of rearranging things as you go along to try and maybe you're making a message for those that you share your house with to say back in 5, went to the store, or something a little bit more silly. How was it participating alongside the students, and how did their perspectives change your work as you went about this 9-month residency and process of creating Proofread?
Well, I think um, I think with printmaking particular, there's kind of like some like unwritten rules in particular of like how you handle a print and how you handle paper. Like there's a very particular sensitivity to it. And
Mm.
once you make your print, you really don't want to touch it at all because of, you know, the transfer of like uh, fingerprints and dirt and that kind of thing. So to me, that was like a really interesting thing to kind of discuss with the students, because when I had this idea, I want to make an artwork that replaces the letterpress with a dance floor, where the impression of a print, rather than being put through the press, you're using the active kind of footwork of the people dancing to create the relief print underneath. Um, so it was interesting to kind of talk to the students, the lecturers, and the technicians, because they were like, good God, you know, you wouldn't want audiences to pick up these prints. But to me, that was actually kind of like the most exciting aspect of it, because I love
Mm.
the idea of people picking up an artwork and having that permission to kind of touch it, um, and to almost let that process kind of be really open, so that if there are scuff marks or kind of those lovely marks that are left by people handling things, that becomes part of the artwork. A little bit like when you go like to your grandma's house and you might get out an old board game and it's really scuffed and like the edges are kind of rounded, and because it's had that kind of, it's been played with so many years, that kind of language that you find in those things, those traces of being used, really fascinate me. And then this idea of kind of using clothing to create this almost kind of like hieroglyphic language. So
Mm.
I asked the students and kind of people that I became friends with from doing this 9-month visiting artist residency to give me their old clothing, because again, I'm really
Yeah.
really fascinated with this idea of like how clothing can carry the traces of like the banal kind of everyday of laundry or folding, caring for that item and wearing it, and that those kind of those marks actually can be translated really well in print, um, like little holes or fraying or even like repairs, or even like a sock that maybe has gone like completely bobbly from laundering. When you ink that and print it, it just amplifies it somehow, like through the ink, and through how it's kind of the impression that's left on the paper. So there's this transference of kind of that wear and tear that goes onto the paper, but also when you print clothing, you get this really fascinating inside and outside perspective where they kind
Mm.
of look a bit like x-rays. And I really kind of love this idea of making my own alphabet that's very human, but also that people can instantly recognize. Like clothing's kind of, it's a universal thing that we all understand. And I thought that would be a really interesting kind of jumping off point to kind of to use clothing and to kind of let those marks of being worn carry through, but to also have this very human scale for people to play with.
It's
So
yeah, there's so much to break down within all of that. Really interesting to hear you describe this this interaction with the printed word alongside something that is very clearly handled by the masses, which, like, at the time when the printing press was first introduced, as you were saying before, that's not necessarily the experience that would have been had by the general public. I want to get into this, into the clothing element that you were talking about before, because you're using the old clothes of other people. How on earth do you have that conversation with somebody saying, hey, you know that t-shirt that you always wear for like a decade? It's fascinating, and I want to borrow it so that I can use a I want to use a letterpress on it. How on earth does that conversation go?
Well, I think that's the beauty of working alongside in a kind of print shop for 9 months, kind of like an academic year, really, is that we all, and I was working particularly in the undergraduate printmaking space, um, is that you see what each other are making,
Mm,
and you can sort of, with printmaking, you know, you need to make prints in a print facility, um, because the equipment's very expensive, it's very big, it needs maintenance. So this is why, printmaking facilities and studios exist, so that we can like collectively use those facilities. But also, when you do that, you have access to like this hive mind, because printmaking can also be very tricky. And there's all kinds of like nuances of like how to get the best print, um, whether it's the kind of particular paper that you're using, or the kind of pressure, or even like the actual physical press. Like there's lots of different kinds of presses that operate in different ways and kind of can give you a different outcome. So I think you can really celebrate each other's like successes. And then when you have those failures, you can also like access that kind of um, problem solving with the student body.
mm.
So because you're kind of having those conversations over like a 9 month period, it kind of just sort of like, it just sort of comes up, because the students could see me like testing out smaller bits of clothing, and then it would just sort of like come out in conversation. I was given all sorts of things, like old underpants and t-shirts and like gym gear that was really worn out, and hoodies that were beyond, you know anything. And I think it's kind of nice to sort of have a little piece of you in the exhibition, but the um the tricky thing is kind of like how, because with printmaking everything's done in reverse.
Mm,
There's a lot of mirroring that happens with printmaking. So all of the letters were actually created backwards to create the print so that it read forwards, if you know what I mean. So
mm,
that process in itself was done through, it's called a collograph. So basically, collograph is like really fascinating, but it's kind of like a poor man's version of etching, and kind of came about in the Second World War, when copper plates became very, expensive and were kind of being used for the war effort. And so
mm,
collograph came about, where you can have the same effect using a thick cardboard that you kind of create your marks into it, a little bit like an etching plate. But
mm,
also it's great because you can adhere stuff to it. So I was able to adhere the clothing in these kind of gestures of a letter. So for instance, in the exhibition, the letter O is made up with socks that are kind of connected to one another. The V is an upside down pair of jeans that are kind of like
mm,
gest. And then a W is made with a pair of pantyhose that's kind of gestured. And then the Z is made with a pair of leggings. And so that was kind of like interesting to be what clothing kind of lends itself to being a particular letter.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's just so much to think about within all of this. What do you think using old clothes like this or an older medium like a letterpress, what do you think that the messages that you share with these mediums say in 2025 when messages and information can be disseminated and shared across vast spaces and across time just like that?
Well, I think hosting this exhibition in kind of a space that anyone can access in a gallery, particularly Martha Street Studio, that has a wonderful, they have lots of public programming. They do lots of workshops with young people. There's like classes you can take there, and it has this like awesome street presence in that particular part of Winnipeg. In that, having an exhibition in that space kind of presents this really interesting opportunity to create. It's kind of like a community message board. So
Hmm.
the idea is someone might come in and let's just say they might make a sentence um, such as people say sweet nothing. That could then get turned into like another word, such as people say sweet things. And so
Hmm.
basically, it kind of evolves over time, and the sentence can then change its meaning completely with just the soft switching out of letters. And what's fascinating when you see the exhibition over a period of a month, like some of the things that people might leave can be quite political, or it could be quite silly, or it could be like rhyming. And so I think I really love this idea that people can come in and kind of change the word up or even just observe other people doing it, that it becomes this place of exchange, this place of
Hmm.
to leave a message for others to then engage with, a little bit like what you were saying earlier with like magnetic fridge poetry,
Yeah.
all of the games that you can play with that. And um, I think it's really, for me, interesting to kind of open it up to the public, to kind of let them, you know, participate in this way, that kind of they're picking up the prints and they're kind of engaging with it in this really physical way. And how I've kind of done that in the gallery, and this is actually what a lot of the students and kind of professors had ideas about, was how to create permission in a space like a gallery, because there's a lot of unwritten rules about how to act in a gallery. So really, I'm kind of like I'm pushing up against those kind of what's expected of you. And so we created a shelving, very simple shelving unit that wraps around the gallery. So then that kind of allows you to read the letters, the words that people leave behind in this kind of very, a bit like a sentence, a physical sentence. And then the letters that people aren't using are kind of just left leaning against the wall. And I know people are probably wondering, like, how can you make words out of just from A to Z? But what I have done actually is I've made a very reduced Scrabble set. So I've got 4 prints of the A, for like the vowels and the consonants and that kind of thing. So there's 50 letters in total.
Hmm.
So there's enough to kind of make interesting words, but there's not enough in that you kind of have to be quite strategic what kind of word you're making, because you've only got a limited amount.
And it makes you think that much harder about the words that you're trying to use. It's really interesting to talk about the use of the letterpress and the involvement of the public in this sense, because when the letterpress, when the printing press was first invented in the 15th century, like, this is a real watershed moment for democracy in some senses, because everybody can participate then in society. And I'm wondering, in a day and age where it's easier than it ever has been to participate in that sort of public forum of ideas, but also maybe there's more of a sense of feeling powerless to use those ideas to affect maybe real change. What do you think Proofread says to audiences in 2025? Or in other words, what do you hope that people who engage with Proofread leave the Martha Street studio thinking about?
Oh, that's a good question, Nolan. I think I would love, I mean, I'm also kind of like open to, I don't want to put my kind of expectation of what people should do, because I think that's part of the fun, is leaving it kind of open to what people might think. But I think if people leave with a sense of curiosity and a sense of kind of this community, like a kind of way of communicating that's quite collaborative with strangers, and to also how meaning is made through language, I think I'd be really happy with that. Because the irony is I'm actually really dyslexic.
Wow.
So I think I really enjoy word games and that kind of thing, because I have to really think about it. And I've kind of come at it from this angle of like, rather than fearing my horrible spelling, is to kind of, is to kind of roll with it. Like, for me, it takes me so long to read like a page in a book. Like, it really commands my attention. And I think in a similar way, like, Proofread commands your attention in this way that's, like, I hope is quite engaging.
Yeah.
Mainly because, it is quite difficult to read the letters, because obviously they're like made from clothing, and there is a kind of like, that font that was made, that typeface called dingbats, where it didn't really make sense. It was just like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wingdings.
wingdings. It's a little bit like that, in that you have to really kind of follow it through, and to kind of decipher what the word is, which I do quite enjoy watching people do that, because people tend to like say out loud what they're reading at the same time. But I think I think I'm really interested in this kind of like, in collaborating with strangers and kind of bringing people together in this forum, and to leave a mark, or to leave a word, a sentence, for others to kind of change over time. That's the thing that really interests me. So if people are left with a sense of wonderment, or a sense of like, wow, print has this awesome history and I want to know more about it, then I think if people leave with a sense of curiosity, I'd be just delighted.
Proofread runs until July the 12th at the Martha Street studio in the Exchange District. We'll have more information about the hours for the studio and about Proofread at our website, classic107.com, and on the Classic 107 app. Yvonne Mullock, this has been such a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Classic 107.
Thanks so much, Nolan.